of several of the bridges that cross the Charles River during the 2009 Transportation Reform Act, and the act that created MassDOT and transferred ownership of this particular bridge, the Anderson Bridge, that carries North Harvard / JFK Street over over the Charles River in Cambridge and Boston, to MassDOT. So we own the structure and the footprint of the bridge, but DCR continues to own, operate, and maintain the adjacent facilities in the Charles River Reservation. So we've had some really great collaborative partnerships over the years in the Accelerated Bridge Program, the program which funded the rehabilitation of many of the bridges over the Charles, including the Longfellow Bridge, the Craigie Dam, and the BU Bridge. Paul Moyer is here with me tonight. He's the lead for our consultant team at Gill Engineering, and then you can see a whole bunch of different logos here. We have a pretty diverse team looking at all sorts of issues in terms of from landscape architecture to architecture and electrical engineering and environmental permitting, and of course our public involvement team, Nate Curtis and Nick Gross, right up here at the front of the table. So you'll see Nick and Nate hammering away at the keyboard and taking notes. That's to prepare a detailed summary of tonight's meeting and provide minutes that we'll later post to a website along with this presentation. Or, not, actually, we don't have a website, right? I spoke.
Available upon request.
Available upon request. If you didn't have a chance to or didn't notice, we have a sign-in at the back of the room. Give us your email address, and we'll be able to get you in our stakeholder database and provide you updates as the project moves along. So, where are we? This is an aerial view of the project location. This is Soldiers Field Road on the Boston side. And of course, here's Harvard Square over in Cambridge. And this is the Anderson Memorial Bridge, which I'm sure all of you are uncomfortably familiar with, is under construction today, and it seems like it has been for quite some time. Just as a point of clarity, when we first began looking at this, the feasibility of an underpass at Anderson, we started doing it actually back in 2010 as part of the rehabilitation project. And at that time, we determined that based on the extended environmental and historic review periods associated with modifying our rehabilitation plan, that we deferred a underpass or a boardwalk alternative to the future. And that's where we are. That's why we're here today. This is the future, as it were. And I remember, I'm sure all of you saw on your Facebook feeds yesterday, the Back to the Future frenzy. Yesterday was the day that they went to, and it's quite a different future than I think Hollywood envisioned. That was driving me nuts. Don't put that one in the minutes. A little older now. So you know, this is to Watertown, this is to Boston, Soldiers Field Road, and what we're talking about is separating building a spur path that would make it so that bicyclists and pedestrians wouldn't have to cross at grade at the North Harvard Street intersection here, and you'll see a whole lot more detail about that. So we're evaluating a set of alternatives for separating what currently is existing and what we have proposed existing under the rehabilitation project to remove the vehicular and bicycle pedestrian interaction by putting bicyclists and pedestrians on the spur path below grade, much closer to the river. You know, in doing this, we're hoping to enhance the recreational use of the Charles River Reservation, better accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians, and provide an uninterrupted path facility at this particular location, and address the safety and accessibility and congestion concerns that we've been hearing from path users for years, ever since we kicked off the Anderson Rehabilitation Project's development. And we're doing that by evaluating 3 alternatives. We'll discuss, Paul will get into a description, fairly rigorous discussion of later. We'll select the preferred alternative and advance that into our historic consultation process under the State Historic Preservation Law with the Mass Historic Commission, and initiate other environmental permitting requirements as determined by which alternative we select, and then advance through preliminary design. Ultimately, the project would get to a preliminary design and then a final design, and then we'd seek funding for construction if that is the ultimate outcome. At this time, I'll be clear, that outcome is not necessarily set in stone. So right now we're really at a preliminary planning phase. We're looking at the feasibility of two grade separated alternatives. We're looking at how those compare to the future existing condition associated with the improvements that we propose as part of the rehabilitation project. And like I said, we'll select the preferred alternative and then advance it later. But tonight we just want to have that initial preliminary planning level discussion. So there's been a huge amount of interest in providing a grade separated facility, most notably in the form of an underpass or a tunnel through the bridge structure. This is something that we've heard about for years from many organizations in the metro area. Most notably, the Charles River Conservancy has been advocating for this for many years, and with a coalition of other groups and local stakeholders and residents and folks who are interested in MassDOT looking at this. And this is really just beginning again tonight. So like I said, we looked at this in 2010 as part of the Anderson project's development, and like I said, we dismissed it then as a matter of really chronology and funding. And we didn't want to jeopardize the full larger rehabilitation project with this proposal. So now that we've been able to separate those two, we have a little more time and comfort to take a second look at it. So the Anderson Bridge is a historic bridge. It was built in 1915. It was modified in the 50s to accommodate the construction of Soldiers Field Road and the Soldiers Field Road underpass. The bridge and the entire Charles River Basin are a National Register Historic District, and the bridge is a contributing element to that district. And as I'm sure many of you know, several of the bridges that cross the Charles are architecturally significant, and we are taking our development approach that is trying to be as sensitive as possible to that fact. As I said earlier, the rehabilitation is currently underway. We expect that to conclude next summer. The rehabilitation project did include a number of improvements to the intersection at Soldiers Field Road and North Harbor. Obviously, the Paul Dudley White path crosses the intersection at grade today in a very chaotic construction condition. Beth Studmeyer and I rode over here from MassDOT, and it was a little hairy out there at rush hour, I'll admit. We know the path narrows on the approach to the bridge, and one of the things you'll see in some of those the later slides is that the rehabilitation project did what it could to eliminate some of the right turning vehicle issues, and widen the sidewalk to provide a lot more space. But one of the things we're looking at is, did that go far enough? And you'll see our alternatives may help alleviate some of those congestion issues at the at-grade intersection. One of the things we've observed by going out and conducting bicycle and pedestrian counts is that about 3/4 of the bicycle traffic continues along the bike path on the reservation, and more than half of the pedestrian traffic as well continues along the path. The rest of them are turning either across the bridge or down towards Alston. And that the Soldiers Field Road westbound vehicle right turns to Harvard Square coming from Boston are concurrent with the pedestrian crossing or the path crossing. So it was an issue that was identified by many advocates back during the rehabilitation project, and I think we did what we could to minimize that impact, but we were asked to go a little further. So these alternatives, they address some of those issues. So here it is. I'm sure most of you in this room are familiar with the existing conditions out there. Like I said, there's a lot of users, and there's a lot of folks that are in conflict with each other. Now that being said, that is the construction condition today. In the future, we'll have something that it resembles this instead of what it was pre-construction here in this aerial, where you had the right slip lane and you had these delta islands. Both actually have right slip lanes on both sides of the approach. In the future, all of that area has been reclaimed for bicycle and pedestrian use. So we had, I think it's 5 or 6 feet of sidewalk, and the rehabilitation built condition will be more like 9 to 16 in certain areas. A lot more room for folks out there, and much shorter crossing distance. And just to remind everybody, these are excerpts from some presentations we gave where we rendered what that would look like. That's the slip lane approaching the intersection from Boston, heading outbound. And this is a rendered view of what that right turn lane would look like with that reclaimed space as sidewalk or multi-use space. So our goals are to study fully and without bias the provision of a grade separated path facility. And we think that a successful separated path would address all of those bike and ped safety issues associated with the bicycle and pedestrian interaction with vehicles at grade. Accommodate increased use, not only in, we think that at grade we will be providing a safe crossing, but that there's a certain maximum amount of capacity that could be enhanced by having a separate spur path. And improving that efficiency overall, meeting the public requests that we've been receiving for many, many years through advocacy and local residents just asking us to look at this for more alternatives for bicycle and pedestrian users. And we think overall enhance the recreational use of the path and the Charles River Reservation as a whole. So, Paul, I'll turn it over to you to give a quick discussion of the alternatives.
All right. So alternative one is an underpass tunnel. On this alternative, the pathway is a spur path that comes off of the existing path, goes down towards the river and punches through this wing wall that, and tunnels underneath North Harvard Street, and then comes out the other side, and then comes back up. There are several retaining walls that are required. This is an elevation view at the portal to that tunnel. The existing bridge above, and then we're showing this opening here, and the path goes right underneath. A couple of things to point out: there are 2 large 30-inch diameter MWRA water pipes located a little bit uncomfortably lower than we would like them, but they are there. And we also are constrained by the water elevation of the river, and we want this to be higher than this, so that this will drain.
Good idea, huh, guys?
Yeah, makes sense.
So the result is we have a height of about 7 foot 8 inches. It's slightly less than the ASHTO standard of 8 feet, but we've done a bunch of studies and we feel that is going to be sufficient. The tunnel itself is 18 feet wide. We've made it just as wide as we possibly could. There's a bridge abutment here and some constraints on this side too. So we wanted to get good sight distance on there. So there's some benefits, addresses the bicycle and pedestrian safety concerns, congestion, as Michael mentioned. It really achieves all the goals that we mentioned. Path connectivity facilitates commuting, relieves congestion at the intersection, and it enhances recreational and access to the river, supports healthy transportation. Some of the design considerations are obviously the impact of that historic research. Blowing a hole right through the side of that thing that's just gotten rehabbed. But we would address that with sensitive design and architecture. Impact to the landscape's character. Right now, there's a lot of vegetation over here. So from the Cambridge side or from the river, you're now gonna see structure and stuff instead of vegetation. Granted, that vegetation's kind of scrubby, but it is what it is. It will have an impact. Constructability issues to be considered. Obviously, doing this construction and tunneling under an active roadway has its challenges, but we have developed some means to do that with shielding and incremental tunneling across that space. This option has some additional pathway intersections right here and here that don't exist. I mean, there's some potential for conflict here, but obviously much less of an impact than the conflicts with vehicles over here. Security, definitely an issue. We have to be mindful. This is a secluded spot. There has to be plenty of lighting, and again, the wide tunnel and maximized sight distances should mitigate that. Tunnel height I mentioned, and then the sight distance is a challenge. Within that site, there's not a lot you can do. We're trying to get as close as we can to the river without actually going into the river, and the permitting impacts and associated costs and schedule impacts. We need to get NWRA's approval for locating a tunnel right underneath their two pipes. We've had meetings with them and came up with some design detailing to fully support their pipes, and they are supportive of that, so to speak. There's one local permit, relatively easy in terms of environmental permitting.
Paul, if I may interrupt just quickly, I'm sorry to do this.
Yes.
Paul, I want to just really drive this one home. One of the points that Paul was making is about the site distance, and most notably on the inbound down river. I always get confused about east, west, north, south here. So I try to avoid those directions. But when you're going inbound, downstream, they're making this movement, it's the curve of the path that we're concerned about in terms of sight distance. We've done the best that we can to maximize where it is that when you're on a bicycle and you're going 15 to 18 miles an hour, maybe even a little faster, some of the users out there, especially because we're on we're talking about coming from up here and going down here. It's with a maximum grade of about 5%. So it's not steep, but it's not flat either. And so one of the concerns that folks have raised internally at MassDOT, and even among the team as a whole, is what from some of the experience that MassDOT and DCR have had with other tunnels on bike path facilities, where there isn't adequate sight distance, and it really gives rise to a significant amount of collisions and injuries. The two notable examples are in Eastham on the Cape Cod Rail Trail, where the approaches for the bike path and the tunnel are very, very skewed. So you have users making a very sharp turn. The other is the Norwottuck Rail Trail in Hadley. It crosses under Route 9. It's a major regional connection for non-motorized users between Amherst, where UMass and many other colleges are, of course, and Northampton. And there's a major regional movement and really heavy use on that trail. It's a very successful trail that, in partnership and collaboration with DCR, we just recently finished a rehabilitation project. It's wildly popular, but that in that particular location where the trail underpasses at Route 9, prior to the reconstruction project, there were a lot of safety concerns out there, and what we don't want to do is replicate that condition here. So clearly, this is not a right angle, but even still, when you're approaching the underpass from this direction, It's not until you get to right about this location, about 30 feet in front of the portal, before you can see through the entire tunnel. And we've been very sensitive.
A bit more than that.
A bit more? Okay,
Yeah.
good. We've been very sensitive to that concern, and like I say, not replicating issues that we've seen in other locations. So I just want to point that out. We're still working on that and evaluating whether or not that's as serious an issue as it could be, or but we're trying to not just overlook it, and be sensitive to the fact that, you know, all it takes is one user who's going too fast, not paying attention, to cause a real problem. And you know, one injury is too many. So anyway, sorry to interrupt your flow, Paul, but I just wanted to clarify.
That's good, that's important. And you know, we've got, I think we have the right people on our team to address that. Peter Firth is here, bicycle path expert from Northeastern University. If there are any other comments or questions about that, Peter can speak with us about that. So, second alternative is the boardwalk. This alternative, the path comes down similar to the first alternative, but then it veers out over a pile-supported timber structure, goes under the first arch, and comes back out and returns up to grade. This is a elevation view of that. Obvious impacts to the river use, significant. And speaking with the boating community, the cruise shells basically cannot use this arch. There isn't enough room. We have some other figures that we can show you, but there just is not enough room to get past that, which is, you know how many motors there are out there. So there is that impact. This is located as far in that direction as we can get while maintaining an 8-foot clearance envelope there. Benefits, pretty much all the same benefits as the underpass. It, you know, removes the conflicts, path connectivity, and so forth. Design considerations, impact. There are impacts to this historic resource in terms of visual impact. There's no permanent changes to the bridge at all, but there are impacts to the area. Obvious significant impacts to navigability of the river, environmental impacts to the river, piles going down into the water, and the river bottom, and so forth. Similar impact to landscaping. Constructability, this would be constructed with helical piles in the river. Can be done, but somewhat difficult. Same additional path intersections and pretty much the same security concerns of being in a secluded area. Okay, then the third alternative is the no-build alternative, which is actually a little bit of a misnomer. This is basically the alternative that will result after the Anderson Bridge reconstruction is completed. Michael pointed out the before and afters on that, but here's another view from above. This is prior to construction. You had a slip lane here and a triangle here, and then here, a lot of that area is filled in. So the pedestrians are getting closer, much closer, and have a shorter travel distance, and you don't have the potential impacts from that slip lane. The benefits are obvious: no cost, no permitting, no environmental impact. No navigability impacts. Design considerations does not address the community request for uninterrupted path connectivity, and definitely does not achieve the goals mentioned before, as well as the other two alternatives. The potential bicycle pedestrian conflicts with vehicles remain, and the congestion at the crossing for pathway users for days. So those are the alternatives.
Thank you, Paul. And I'll point out something, one of the details that Paul didn't mention is the reason why we looked at two grade separated alternatives came out of, it's a historical fact that when we were conducting the development of the rehabilitation project, we were able to avoid an adverse impact on the historic resource through the very context-sensitive rehabilitation, where we essentially, I don't know if I'm going to get the right word here, guys, but replicated the architectural facade of the Anderson Bridge. We had sent the previous feasibility study that was conducted then to the Mass Historic Commission, and they asked us to look at a boardwalk alternative at that time, and we did. Mostly, again, as Paul mentioned, it's a reversible effect and is sort of the less impactful alternative. And that's one of the big reasons why we were looking at it. Just evaluating its overall engineering feasibility, which, as Paul mentioned, driving helical piles under a bridge arch is challenging. There are manual methodologies that can make it so that you're not driving with a pile driver. You're actually hand turning these things in. That's why they're called helicals. You can just spin them into the ground essentially. And they're a structural technique that we've applied in a couple other path systems. A very successful path that we again collaborated and partnered on with DCR at the Alewife Brook, something that we funded under the Recovery Act program, and has been a very successful project. This is a much larger structure, and I think a structure of this scale is a little untested with that technology. But like Paul said, it's not necessarily not doable. It's really more about balancing the overall impact of the historic resource with the full navigation use of the navigable use of the river, impacts to the river itself in terms as a natural resource. And that's just a little background on that. So in terms of the schedule, as I'm sure you are all aware, this is our first meeting on this since we last spoke with the community about it during the Anderson Rehabilitation Project. This is an ongoing process that is happening concurrent with the construction of the bridge. We think that the bridge will be finished prior to us completing permitting, environmental review, and final design, and then ultimately seeking funding for construction. So, but that project, the construction project, was done in a way to not preclude an underpass or a boardwalk in the future. In fact, there were a number of elements that were designed into that rehabilitation that made it so that the work was essentially reversible, and we could either punch a tunnel through or at a later time accommodate a boardwalk. So tonight's meeting, as I mentioned earlier, we're documenting through minutes, and so when I finally give you all a chance to talk to me, we'll have all of that on record, and we'll be presenting that as part of including that in our feasibility report and weighing the alternatives with the feedback we're receiving both here and over the next several weeks as this meeting itself generates more of a conversation in the community. We anticipate that the final report will be done probably by the end of fall, maybe early winter, depending on how quickly we can get our act together. Things sometimes take a little time in government, and we'll make the report available upon request. Anyone who wants to see it, we can certainly share that with folks. And then after we've selected a preferred alternative, we would advance that to preliminary design. In MassDOT speak, we have a number of standard milestones in our project development process, so we would be advancing that to a 25% design phase. And we have about 4 milestones, where it's 25, 75, and 100 for final. And along with that, there's a number of bridge calculations and plans that are drawn up. So this very bureaucratic process, but it's how we do things. So right now, our current study, the work that Paul and his team have been tasked to get to is that preliminary state of design, that 25% stage, where we've conducted our environmental review, we've advanced through permitting, and then the next steps are to advance the project into a final design state and identify funding for construction. And of course, the entire time, we'll be coming back to the community as we get through our major milestones. We'll be presenting again in this type of format. So if you want to get in touch with us, this is Nate Curtis's information. I don't expect any of you to write it down tonight, but he can certainly provide it to you if you want to reach out to him after the meeting. And then this will be on the presentation that we share with folks. And that's it. That's our whole presentation, and we're going to just go ahead and get started, and I'll open it up for comments.
Thank you. For the tunnel option, is there a way to weigh the risks of a bike-on-bike interaction at that curve versus a bike-on-car interaction at grade? You know, you don't have to answer now, but I think that would be somewhat of a calculated risk that you take into. The second part of that question, do you have user counts for the bicycle traffic through there versus the rower traffic through that third arch, to weigh what the users counts would be from bicycles if you did the boardwalk versus how many rowers go through there?
Yeah, so let me start with the first question. I think there is not a quantitative way to analyze risk of bike versus bike ped versus bike ped vehicle, injury, collision potential. It's really more qualitative. Eliminating the at-grade crossing eliminates the conflict between non-motorized and motorized users. And I don't think that there is any methodology nationally that. Pete, do you have an answer for that, Pete?
Well, I don't have any national methodology there. When I speak to him on the power center, that's in the active transportation unit, part of his team, that one. But the severity of motor vehicle and bike crashes or motor vehicle and pedestrian crashes is typically far and away more severe than any bike on bike or bike
Right.
crashes. And for instance, you almost never see fatality in those kind of crashes that we do often motor vehicles. So the risk of crashes, we'd have to do some analysis to figure that out, but the severity undoubtedly be low.
Peter, would you like that?
Yeah, I'd like to point out a few things about this risk that we're talking. It's almost, it's so tiny. I think it's negligible. There are two reasons. One reason that it comes to people's mind is because of that the underpass at Route 9 that you mentioned. That one not only had a sight distance problem, it was very different qualitatively. You couldn't stay in your lane. A bicyclist couldn't stay on their side of the road unless they slowed down real slow. It was a 90-degree turn. You're coming down a ramp, and then you've got a blind corner where you've got to turn 90 degrees. And to stay on your side of the lane, you've got to slow down to about 4 miles an hour. Well, you can imagine there were a few bicyclists who thought, I don't think anybody's coming, and so they didn't slow down as much. They want to take the turn at 8 or 10 miles an hour, which means they have to swing out into the opposing lane, and what do you know, somebody's coming and they have a crash. None of this can happen here. Okay? The curves are gentle, so you can do those curves any speed you want to. So all that experience, all that fear that comes from the underpasses that we've had before, we've taken that into account, and it's just gone. And then the second thing is the idea that there is a sight distance concern. It comes from there's a national standard on what's the sight distance based on 18-mile-an-hour bicyclist with very poor brakes and who's not paying any attention and is like, oh, it takes them 2.5 seconds to respond. So just to give you a sense of the scale, when we design traffic lights, we assume it'll take people 1 second to respond, get their hands on the brakes, or driving a car, get their foot on the brakes. Because they're coming toward a traffic light, and everybody knows if the light is green, hey, it might change. Whereas if you're just kind of in the middle of nowhere, people aren't expecting anything, and if all of a sudden, you know, there's a broken down car on the road or a dead deer lying in the path, you might be surprised, and it might take you 2.5 seconds to respond. So I think it's reasonable to consider that as a bicyclist is approaching a tunnel, they'll notice, oh, there's a tunnel. You know, they're making an S-curve to enter the tunnel. They'll kind of be looking. So the idea that they'll be so surprised it'll take them 2.5 seconds to respond. There's a lot of extra safety built in. So if you say, you know, a person can respond in maybe 1.5 seconds instead of 2.5, then you have all the distance you need to come to a complete stop to anything you see ahead of you, even if you're going 16 miles an hour, with very bad brakes. If you have decent brakes, even more. And then finally, one more thing that's really important. The width of this tunnel, as they say, it's 18 feet. So to avoid hitting something, you don't necessarily have to come to a full stop. You just have to move a little bit over to the right or the left. So anybody can see from the picture, they're rather gentle curves there. We go through curves like that all the time. They're way more gentle than the curves when you go under the BU Bridge or some other situations. So I think that the risk of bike-on-bike collision it's a lot less than what there is on Soldiers Field Road right now, just because of how narrow the path is and things like that.
How much more would that be on the boardwalk? That's got sharper curves, obviously.
It's got sharper, so on the boardwalk alternative, it's got sharper curves, but the plan is to make it wider than the BU Bridge boardwalk. So it wouldn't be as bad as the BU Bridge boardwalk.
So what does that mean for your assessment of the risk of collision? It sounds like you're discarding it. It doesn't really.
I think it's zero. Yeah.
How about MassDOT? They're listing it as a factor here. Is it a factor?
I'm sorry.
Hear that? So, given what this gentleman just said, vis-a-vis other similar, arrangements, BU Bridge and getting underneath the ramps down the Fenway, is this really a risk? And if it's not, why are we considering it here? Is it really a consideration? It doesn't sound like it is.
Well, Peter and I don't necessarily completely agree on this, but
I totally agree. I commuted on this path.
Look, this is a matter of. There's no way to say it's a matter of fact, right? There is an informed opinion, an experienced opinion, and my opinion, which is probably neither. I'll be honest.
So,
that being the case, we have to be very conservative and cautious about, like I said, not replicating issues that we've caused in the past or created in the past. And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to magnify the risk beyond, something that may be really, really minor. Part of this conversation is me calling it out to you all, and you saying to me, we don't agree, or we think you're being too conservative, and that's fine, which you said, and I hear you. I'm not a regular path user. I mean, I've ridden a bike down the Charles several times. I don't use it every day, I'll admit. So that's why we're here, is to have this conversation and have a dialogue. And Peter and I have had this conversation several times, and other members of my team who have had experience planning paths who are formerly of DCR. Sudmeyer and Ron Bergfors, they're both former DCR employees that are, that represent some of that other more conservative side of the house. We've been working with Dan Driscoll on many projects over the years, and there's a larger body of experience here that we're just being responsive to. But I don't want to overstate. And hang on, everyone, just 1 second. I want to answer your second question. We don't necessarily have counts of, we have counts of bike and pedestrian users and vehicle counts. We have not counted crew boats yet. So that'd be a new one for MassDOT, I think. I got a project out on Route 9, and we got a comment at a public information meeting we gave, and this was a new one. Snowmobiles. crossing the road. So we're gonna take snowmobile counts. So this is pretty neat. But Beth, do you have something to add?
Just to put it in perspective, that we have a lot of engineers, at DOT who are used to reviewing projects based on specific criteria and design requirements. And this is an area where there's recommendations for site stopping distance, but so they're not as comfortable whenever they're trying to make decisions about projects when there's nothing specific for them to point to about safety and risk associated with it. And just to also mention, with no disrespect to Peter, that we have some skin in the game. This is going to be our underpass, and we'll be responsible for what comes out of it. So I think as we're talking to our colleagues about this, we need to keep in mind their perspective and how they're viewing it on behalf of our agency.
Yeah, Dan.
I want to just add, I think Peter's making a really good case passing through the tunnel, but to Paul's point about the intersections, could you just back up to alternative 1? I think something that might be helpful, I think something that might be helpful in the next rendition of this as you move forward is to, if you had a circulation map of all the possible moves that a bike or pedestrian could be making, either coming straight across, for example, if I'm biking westbound and someone else is using the underpass eastbound, has anybody thought about who has the right of way? Under ASHTO, under guidelines, under all the standards, what are the right of way movements at those intersections? And that's, I think it's really important, because if we have to educate the users about those right of ways so they know how to behave when those potential conflicts happen.
So no user counts, but it sounds like
I think qualitatively, the rowing community and the recreational use of the river is pretty significant. And regardless if there were only 10, it's still that's still the use that's provided for today. And it may not be. It's not quite the same as some of the transportation decision-making choices we make based on the number of cars, the number of bicyclists. Allocate this much space for this or that. It's kind of a different animal.
There are 2 other arches that could go up. Do you think it's there's 1/10 as many rowers as bicyclists go under there?
Yeah, but I just don't think. I think that's an apple and oranges kind of conversation. I don't think it's fair to say, well, we can take space from the rowers because there's not as many.
No,
it's just not. It's not an equivalent.
I just wondered if it could count.
Isn't that also used for Head of the Charles?
Yes, right. Of course. There's major events here. So
one other thing is the middle arch is used for power boats, and the 2 side arches are used for.
That's not at all the case. The rowers have their own maps of which arches are used at which times. And they change in early October because of people practicing for Head of the Charles. They change after Thanksgiving again. So all 3 arches get used. And as a matter of fact, putting the boardwalk there would probably preclude the Head of the Charles from taking place on the Charles River.
And that's a concern we have. I just want to pause and thank you, Senator Brownsburg, for joining us this evening. Thanks for coming out. Do you have a comment? Just raising your hand.
No, yeah, somebody's looking at,
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you all for your input on that. Sure.
I have a few things I'd like to say. My name is Gabriella Romano. I live in Cambridge, across the river. And given the myriad benefits that a separated path would have, I'm actually appalled that a pedestrian bike separated path wasn't included in the first construction. And I would certainly hope that as you go and fix the western and River Street bridges, that the underpasses are included from the get-go. It just seems like, as a driver, as a biker, and as a walker, it's a no-brainer here. I think the underpass would improve the quality of life as well as safety for drivers and bikers and walkers. We all know that the bridge crossings, despite traffic lights, are dangerous crossings at any time. There are regular walkers, there are regular bikers there competing with drivers pretty much every time I'm there, no matter which vehicle or feet I'm on. And I think that if we were to have 3 underpasses all the way, we actually might really increase commuting, which would reduce traffic, which is also help, of course, with the greening of Massachusetts and the efforts to make this a cleaner place. I think the underpass would add quality and ease for those of us who use the river for recreation as well. It would signal to visitors, to commuters, and to residents alike that the river is a resource that we cherish and we want to fully enjoy. And speaking of the head of the Charles, I was at that bridge, I was at that intersection last weekend. We were all stopped. Pedestrians were stopped. Bicycles were jostled. Cars were jammed. It took 20 minutes for me to move half a mile out of Cambridge in a car. And this area is, the head of the Charles isn't the only big annual special event we have. These are very regular occasions here in this area, and I don't think they have minimal impact on the quality of life. And so I beg you guys that we need an underpass, and we need it sooner rather than later, and that I think the boardwalk, if somebody's going to say that it would preclude us from having the head of the Charles, it's no longer a consideration.
Yeah.
Excellent comments. I don't even have a response. Senator.
Yeah, I would ask a couple of questions. Just to put it in context, right, is maybe you guys can help me fill out a couple of details here. Ultimately, this has its greatest benefit when all three bridges are done. Right? I mean, the worst bridge, the worst crossing by far is the River Street crossing. And that's the one where you really are taking your life in your hands as a cyclist trying to get across on the Boston side of the river. My understanding is that the Accelerated Bridge Program, which funded this project, is now essentially tapped out as a funding source.
Yes.
So is there any identified funding source at this point to address the Western Avenue and the River Street bridges?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, you guys are doing it.
The rehab.
Yeah.
River and Western?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been awarded.
You're talking about the crosswalk project.
Rob Antico's project?
Those are the interim improvements. So
The interim improvements, right?
There is a
So
project.
you might want to
that-
comment on those.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let's, could you say that a little louder? So there is no
Yep.
source identified for the full reconstruction
No.
of those, which
There's
would
not.
be the place where you would perhaps be able to do ramps, perhaps to be able to do underpasses. What is,
Perhaps.
what interim,
So-
money is being spent there?
Sure. Let me fully address your comment, Senator. There, at the time of, I guess at this point, this is about 3 years ago, where the Accelerated Bridge Program capital funds, the money left to be dedicated for projects that we would advertise for construction and ultimate contractor procurement and build, was starting to run out. We planned a number of projects. Several of them were the ones that we inherited from DCR when transportation reform handed us ownership and care and control of those bridges. And there were a number of them. But most notably, there were some really large ones. The Woods Memorial Bridge in Medford and Everett, where we are building an underpass, a boardwalk. Just for anyone out there that thinks that MassDOT and DCR doesn't like underpasses or boardwalks from previous public meetings, Dan reminds me we put them all over the place. And again, now we're here tonight. But that program, the program essentially became overspent. You know, in terms of what you plan at year one is not what you get at year 5. And I think the program was very successful on a statewide basis, and that was a good thing. But the River Street and Western Ave bridges were fairly costly. The total price tag on those rehabilitations was hovering right around $50 million. And
50 each or 50 total?
50 total. They were, I mean, if you split it down the middle, it's about 25 each, and similar to the cost of the Anderson rehabilitation. I'm not sure what the final construction bid was and all that, because I kind of get left out of that after we get through the design and development. But it was hovering right in that range, about 25, maybe upwards of 30, when you account for all the utility costs. So at this time, there is no funding identified or allocated for River and Western. And furthermore, This is sort of the low-hanging fruit in terms of the three, in providing an underpass.
Is that a statement about because
About-
it's already been partly done, or because the engineering's harder on the other bridges?
Yes, because the engineering is a lot harder. There are seawalls in that area of the Charles, and I don't think there's any one of those crossings on either the Boston or Cambridge side where you have riverbank on both sides. In this case, we have quite a bit of riverbank on both approaches to a potential underpass, and it's a lot easier to do. The seawalls are not in terribly great condition, and they're also part of the historic district, so any impact to those would be another sort of stack on top of the impact to the bridge structure itself in terms of its historic integrity. And we think that that's a lot more challenging. I don't think that we've looked at those in the same depth that we have here in Boston, and Anderson on the Boston side.
So there was a comment that Dan made that maybe we just want to talk a little bit
The interim.
about what's happening, what interim money is being spent on those intersections.
So unfortunately, I didn't bring any figures of that with me this evening. I apologize for that. But there is a low-cost project that's being awarded to deal with pedestrian accommodation, crosswalk signals, some traffic improvements on the Boston side of River Street and Western Ave.
Both bridges.
Yeah, I believe so, or is it just one? Yeah, because it's changed a lot. I haven't seen it in quite some time. We can.
It's mostly, yeah.
Because that was the big consideration in Cambridge Street, where that's striping, some curb relocation, so you can accommodate in some work on the streets.
But it was at the. Oh, Lou, do you have?
Yeah, no, I was just mad that even on the full little plan, I don't think they've been doing controlling and that they're looking at different food facilities on River and Western and separate wagons because of this information.
Right. When we were undergoing, and I'd like to focus on Anderson, but I know that this is a concern for everybody. It's about the full length of the path, right? And when we were actively working on the River and Western Rehabilitation Project, we had dismissed underpasses because of the engineering feasibility and overall overarching concerns there. Cost, feasibility in terms of making those connections to the seawalls. It's a much lower dip, so in order to meet the accessibility requirements, we'd be building a really large path that the security concerns that Paul mentioned associated with the underpass and the boardwalk here would be even more significant at River and Western, because Paul, or Scott, maybe you're better to answer this. I mean, this is a couple hundred feet, right? About 250, 300 feet on each side.
Yeah, about that. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to see and scale it off to the human level when you're looking at a cartoon plan on a projector screen. But that's a fairly significant, amount of infrastructure that, in this case, is connected with the landscape. At River and Western, that wouldn't be the case. You would have a structure that's just floating in air. I mean, obviously on piles, it's not. We don't have magic in MassDOT yet, but it would be a much different facility than what we're proposing here. So that's why I refer to this as the low-hanging fruit out of the three, because there's already, the Charles River banks are already there for us to build on. There aren't the seawalls. The grade difference isn't nearly as significant, and I think overall this is a much more cost-effective location for an underpass.
Is anybody in the room able to say what is planned at River Street and the status of that short-run project?
Dan, it sounds like we were about to award a contract.
I believe the contract is awarded.
Maybe I'm asking DCR.
Yeah, that's right. Well, last I spoke, Rob Antico is, I believe, managing that for DOT. And last I spoke with Rob, he said that they were awarding it, and I think a notice to proceed had gone out. And there was some work on Western as well as River in the contract, the last bid set that I saw at least. They were doing improvements to both those intersections. and he thought it might actually get underway this fall, but I haven't seen any activity yet.
Will there be a walk signal
So
at River?
Mike, the full project encompassed 4 bridges. I advanced the design to 100%. It includes rehabilitation of the 2 large bridges and full replacement
Of the overpass.
bridges over Soldiers Field Road. River Street, Cambridge Street, and Western Avenue. Full replacement over Soldiers Field Road.
Right, I always lose that detail. We're actually talking about 4
It's
bridges.
actually 4 bridges.
Right.
The 2 bridges over Soldiers.
The 2 overpasses over Soldier Field Road.
And Western Avenue, and the 2 large bridges. So River Street and Western Avenue.
The same was,
Oh, I get you.
right. Right, yeah, right.
So we advanced the design to 100%, and what we did is for these interim measures, we pulled out a lot of the elements for the surface work, treatment for paving, sidewalks, and things like that, and awarding it as a separate project. What we did, we were tasked to look at the underpass option for both those bridges, and came to a determination that was almost impossible to get an underpass through there. And the reason, as you mentioned, is the seawalls and utilities passing through both those bridges, which are actually more than what's going through the Anderson Memorial Bridge. Harvard has a cogeneration steam power plant, or Blackstone plant on the corner of Western Avenue. So there are significantly sizable steam mains that feed the Genzyme plant, and that is the only plant in the world that does what they do. That steam service cannot be disrupted. We also have the main, anyone who's spent time on the Western Avenue Bridge watching the regatta knows that there's always the smell of gas in the air. National Grid has 2 significant gas mains crossing the Western Avenue Bridge that provide almost 80% of gas service to the city of Boston. So this is a significant utility corridor, both bridges. And the mains, MWRA on the Anderson Memorial Bridge has 2 36-inch mains. On Western Avenue and on River Street, they have 54 and 64-inch mains.
So with that, I would like to end the discussion on River and Western, because we're here to talk about Anderson. But thank you very much for an overview of the constraints there, Anthony. So I don't want to go out of order, but sure.
So my name is Barbara Jacobson, and I work with MassDOT, and I'm wondering, like, what is the scope of the area and the connectivity component for people who want to get onto this path? And let's say you want to go towards Watertown or towards Boston. So what are the turns like in that configuration? So if you're coming up from, let's say, Allsted, you're going to turn right because it's easier than turning left to get on and then under, or vice versa.
Well, you probably wouldn't go under. You wouldn't be using the spur.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, I guess I don't understand.
Yeah, so if you're not going to make a left turn onto the path because of, let's say, traffic going from Harvard.
Do you want me to answer
And
that?
Yeah, please, Peter, because I'm confused.
Okay, so I think if I understand you right, Barbara, you're talking about somebody who's coming from Alston, and instead of wanting to make a left turn there, which is something they could do, they could do this and then go around.
Loop around.
Or likewise, a person who's coming along the river and wants to go into Cambridge, instead of going across and turning left, they might go through and then loop back.
Right.
So these intersections were made so that the total width edge to edge is a width that a bicyclist can do comfortably at low speed. I mean, you're going to go real slow, but we actually did some tests where we successively we had some plywood walls. We moved them further out and further out and further out to see at what width could a bicyclist comfortably make a hairpin turn. So we have that width.
Because there's so many commuting options at this intersection.
So you'll be able to.
Thank you for that. I apologize. I wasn't
You'll be able to
able to
make
quite
those hairpin
envision where you were. I'm going to take someone on this side of the room because I've been ignoring you guys. I'm sorry. Sure.
So this is all well and good, but as you mentioned earlier, the Historic Commission gets some degree of say. That's part of why, in redesigning the bridge, you have to keep the original facade. Yes. So we can go through all of this, but I guess my question being, do they ultimately have veto power?
No. So let me explain. and this depends on, this is one of these esoteric government regulatory issues wherein there are two major sets of laws. I mean, if you guys would like to do this, I'd happy to be defer, but this is Jeff Shrimpton and Mary Hafferty. I almost called you just Dominic. That's a while ago now. Two of our cultural resources specialists, architectural historians, who have been working on, well, between the both of them, probably over 20 or 30 years of experience in historic architecture, the practice of historic architecture and infrastructure review and that applicability. So there's a federal law that protects National Register historic places. And that's collectively referred to as Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. And that applies to projects that have a federal action, either in the form of a permit or aid. In this case, we're kind of unclear where final construction money funding would come from, so we're going to err on the side of state review, which in our world we refer to as Chapter 254, which is administered by the Mass Historic Commission. And what it provides for is a consultation process wherein Mass Historic makes a determination of effect. We actually recommend a determination of effect to Mass Historic, and then they agree or disagree, and then we consult on what those impacts are. We also bring in consulting parties that would include local historic commissions, folks who have some other major stake in the project that, for whatever their reasoning may be, want to be part of that process. And then Mass Historic facilitates that consultation. It's not a permitting process. They don't issue an approval. They consult on the effect and agree to, well, there's a number of steps. So first we talk about what is the effect. Well, we know from work we've done in the past during the rehabilitation development that an underpass and a boardwalk represent an adverse effect. And then what we do is discuss whether or not that is an avoidable effect. In terms of MHC's opinion on these things, that matters. They consider there's a process. Can you avoid the effect? Well, we justify whether or not that an adverse effect is avoidable based on our overall project's purpose and need. We compare our alternatives to a purpose and need, those goals that I described earlier, and are stated in a much more lengthy narrative in our feasibility report, and present the alternatives against that purpose and need and which one best meets it. So if we say, a no-build alternative or a boardwalk or tunnel, whichever it may be, doesn't meet that, and they still determine it's an adverse effect, well then we say it's unavoidable, because in order to meet that purpose and need, you can't avoid the adverse effect. Then we go through a conversation about minimizing the adverse effect and not doing the least amount of damage we can possible. And Paul alluded to that when he was discussing building any of the two alternatives, any of the build alternatives, with architectural elements that are most context sensitive to the historic structure itself, and trying to replicate some of that architecture, some of the details of the brick facade. You can see we're mimicking the arch that carries as it's over the river. We've got the similar kind of brick details with some of those columnar features. And then we talk about mitigation, and it's a three-step process: avoid, minimize, mitigate. And MHC asks us to consult. So ultimately, they don't have a veto, they don't have an approval, but it can be a lengthy process. And this is why we deferred this during the rehabilitation, because we didn't want to compromise the application of the Accelerated Bridge Program funds. Ultimately, now that we don't have that looming over us, that scheduled deadline, we were able to take a step back and reevaluate. So no, they don't necessarily veto, they don't approve, but there is a fairly intense and involved process that Jeff and Mary will be conducting in consultation with MHC. Okay.
You mentioned you don't know where the funding might be coming from. Do you have any idea of the cost?
Yes, we do. So, as Paul mentioned, doing nothing costs nothing.
Right.
Well, besides the fact that we've already invested somewhere along the lines of 25 to 30 million in rehabilitation of the bridge. At a preliminary stage, where we're at now, Paul and his team have estimated about $2.5 million for the boardwalk and $4 million for the underpass. And that's, I think, assuming that it's a completely standalone project with none of the efficiencies associated with having done that as part of built an underpass as part of the rehabilitation project. So there was some efficiencies associated with contractor mobilization and some of the landscaping items and things like that, but it's not significant. Renata.
Well, thank you for coming here to make this presentation. I just kind of would like to put things a little bit in a historic background. I think we've been discussing underpasses now for about 6 years. And as you mentioned, the underpasses were not part of the original MassDOT proposal to rehabilitate the 3 bridges. And then in July 2014, the Secretary of Transportation said, all right, you're going to investigate underpasses at all 3 bridges at that time. So thank you for moving forward, and I know Secretary Pollack has reinforced that wish that MassDOT explores that, and we're also very grateful that the pipes were moved so that the underpasses could be accommodated. So I think that's wonderful, and I love the idea that you say this is a totally non-biased presentation. So I hope this is true for all MassDOT staff, and
it always is.
And everybody involved, because
I know we're in Austin.
So that is the way. And I think what I hear is that boardwalk, you just have to go through that exercise, but this is out because the boating and the impact. So we're really talking right now about underpass through the abutment at the Anderson Bridge. And
right, well, yeah.
That's what we're looking at right now. And I appreciate your very detailed explanation about the role of the Mass Historical Commission, because they can advise, but it's ultimately MassDOT and weighing the advantages that will make that decision. So I think that is a very helpful analysis, and I hope that the other bridges are not taken out. I think they should go through the same process as this bridge is going through. I realize that there are gas issues and there are steam issues and MWRA issues, but I think they all need to be looked at because in a few years there'll be even more bicyclists. So I think that is very important. But I appreciate you putting all these experts together to look at all that. And you know that we will not be going away. We're working with you.
Dan and I know. Thank you, Renata. In the back.
Hi, everybody.
I'll get to you next.
My name is Peter. I am an Austin biking resident, regular bike commuter, sometimes with a kid on a trailer bike. I'm a pedestrian across this bridge in this area and a driver. And so I just want to echo the comments from someone from Cambridge and their support for the underpass. And regarding, I forgot to say I'm a rower. For ahead of the
You are multimodal.
Yeah, I can oxidate. For the trials, the center arch is the racing arch, and the arch that where the boardwalk is in consideration is indeed the downstream traffic that you got at the start. There's got a while. In normal conditions, rowers would go upstream. We mentioned motorboats can use the center arch and rowers down this arch. And so I'm in support of the underpass. I think it's totally worth it. I would love to see the study, as the other person pointed out, consider approaches
That might be a little more challenging. You might have to kind of get off and pull it yourself.
Be supportive.
Okay, great. Thank you for your comments.
I'm Ken Krookemeyer, I'm from the Livable Streets Alliance, and I'm a board member there. And I've been looking at this for some time, riding the Charles for a long, long time. Since Paul Dudley White Trail was actually constructed. First, I'd like to say thanks to MassDOT and particularly the engineers from Gill Associates who really put their minds to trying to make something work here. And I really think it does. And that's the exciting thing about it. I also think that the surface, which I looked at when it was being reworked in preparation for the reconstruction contract, really won't work. Because, in fact, there are so many right-turning cars at that location that there is never a moment when bicyclists and pedestrians have a clear shot at getting across without going in between cars. And that, while MassDOT, I know, has got to say is acceptable, it really isn't. And so the need for this underpass is extreme. That's why I think it's really worth finding the money and going ahead with it as quickly as possible. And I think the design itself has really accomplished quite a miracle in the sense of making it very open, designed so that it's not going to hold water when it rains. If the Charles were to rise that high that it would actually fill this space and the bike path not to be usable, it's going to drain right out as soon as the water goes down. So it's really designed very well. It's not going to be a bathtub. It's going to be visible. As an aside, I'll note that I was the highway commissioner in charge of highway and bridge design in 1989 when we decided that the two underpasses, the one in Eastham and the one in Hadley that you described, should not be built because those curves were too sharp and that it was a very poor design. A subsequent administration decided to go ahead and build them anyway, and as a result, they don't perform well. But the criteria that we came up with at that time in 1989, as to how far you would have to be back to be able to see under an underpass to be willing to use it in terms of safety, is being met here. And so maybe we were right, maybe we were wrong at that moment in time, but I think we really were right. And that this design really has achieved enough visibility ahead that it can operate very, very safely. We've got much more width here, and we've got to still deal with the fact that people are going to have to learn to behave on shared use paths. I was also involved with the Southwest Corridor path, and know that as more and more bicyclists use it, as more and more pedestrians are walking in the park, there are sometimes pedestrians who are in the way, and there are other times when bicyclists decide they're just going to bully their way through very uncomfortably for the folks who are walking or strolling. We can't avoid that here. We're not going to build still another path, but we certainly can expect that by good design, people will learn to try to be conscious of their responsibilities to each other. So as long as we have eliminated the conflicts with the cars for the people who are going continuous, we will end up with a much better intersection at the top for the people who are going across or for folks who are changing the directions that they're going there. And so ultimately this makes the surface far better than it is today, or will be soon, and makes the continuity work so much better. And that then leads to River and Western. And I think there are some creative ways. Folks who've done such a good job here need to look at good jobs as they might apply and finding ways to do them less expensively than the earlier projections and come up with some real answers there. I'm glad work is going to go ahead at the surface, but it still really isn't going to work until this is a continuous grade separated path the whole way through the Charles. Thanks.
Sure, and one of the things I say a lot to friends and family and kitchen tables and living rooms is about, when we talk about this, because I don't ever stop talking about transportation, but I'm really into it, and I really like thinking about, the users. You talk about people got to learn how to behave. On the Cape, I think the Eastham example is probably the far most extreme in terms of its inability to perform well ever, because you have so many inexperienced recreational users, vacation users, who aren't regular users of the path. They go out there once, they might have, a lot of them have, small children, and they're more worried about their kid falling off their bike than what's ahead of them, probably, most of the time. I don't know what that's like. And then, you go to the other end of that extreme on the Norwatic in Hadley, and actually a lot of those users are daily commuters. They're making that regional movement between Amherst and Northampton. And with some minor geometric modifications at one of the tunnel ports, there's been a drastic decrease in the number of injuries and collisions there. But again, I think it's a matter of, what is the frequency and familiarity of the user with the facility. And in this case, I think the Charles is probably right somewhere in the sweet spot, maybe a little more on the commuter end, where you've got visitors that are, we have obviously a very powerhouse tourist industry here in Boston, and Harvard's a huge draw for that. And with Hubway, you have a lot of inexperienced users out there. Luckily, those bikes don't go that fast. So, I think it's a good point to make that. I think that there is a certain user profile that we should be considering when looking at that risk. But thanks for your comments, Ken. I'm going to go to the back of the room.
Hi, I'm Andrea Williams. I'm also a Peter who's got the multimodal road, bike, motorbike, drive, and walk thousands and thousands. I almost remember the beginning of all that, but so I'm thousands of times. I'm generally on the Cambridge side, but one of the things that I think is important is those of us. I think there are more users on the Cambridge side of the river, and this has a really. There should be a provision. You say you've measured and all, but and I'm sure other people would, rather than crossing on the Cambridge side, I'd go over to this side and go under. So I think there does need to be a lot of attention paid to that sort of cycle. It won't be just people coming in from Alston. And in terms of people learning how to behave, I think if there's really clear signage at the sort of entry points, sort of what people are coming in, that makes a big difference. Like the Minuteman Bikeway is a lot better than it used to be. People don't wander all over. And if DCR could do a better job of maintaining the paths and keeping the stripes, people don't realize. And as long as the path is wide enough, I think it really does. People just are clueless, but if they're given clues, they'll respond. And I don't think it's a very hard thing to do. I think it's pretty simple thing to do.
Sure, and that's some of those design solutions are definitely something that when we get into that later state, we're looking at signage and pavement treatments and all sorts of different creative things. I think there's a lot of elements that we can do, I feel the need to do this because I think DCR gets a bad rep a lot of times because there's a lot that we all would like to get from that agency that they would like to provide for us, and I think DCR does a really great job doing what they can with limited resources. So Dan, thank you for everything you do. We know you guys, you need a little more support at times, so Look at that, Dan. You got an applause.
Yes. Well, in the spirit of that, can I steal 2 minutes for an announcement?
Dan, you get 2 minutes. Right there you go. The award
I can't
goes
resist
to
with all these folks that gathered here. An announcement of some good news from DCR and an urging of your cooperation in spreading the word. We have 2 major maintenance projects about to happen on the Charles River pathways, and one of them is on the Boston side. It's $1.2 million project to restore 2 miles of pathways. It's going to be starting probably November 2nd. The 4 sections include east of the Hatch Shell all the way to the end of the last lagoon, past the Fiedler Footbridge. The second section is east and west of the Mass Ave Bridge, a significant section of pathway. This is all full-depth reconstruction of those paths. The Weeks Footbridge to the Anderson Bridge, also fully restored, and the Elliott Bridge to Artesani Playground. At the same time that's going to be happening, we're going to be starting on the Cambridge side between the BU Bridge and the Longfellow Bridge, which was called Mem Drive Phase 2. This is a $3.5 million endeavor where we're going to be restoring all the pathways in that entire section. I urge you guys to help get the word out for people to plan accordingly. There's going to be a lot of detours and a lot of activity. We tried to push it late in the season before the batch plants closed for the least disruption. But we've thought through all the detours for this, and this administration deserves a lot of credit. It's the most maintenance money they've ever given my shop to go out there and make these places a lot safer. So appreciate it. I'm sorry?
Did you say, when you spoke earlier, you mentioned something about the...
And the underpass under the BU Bridge is going to be fully restored and redecked.
Wow, great.
Including the stringers.
And including the sort of concrete going into it and off of it.
And those two gaps that are on the other side will be repaired as well. That's right. So get the word out, please, and honor our detours. Help our contractors. Thank you, Michael.
Sure, Dan. Thank you. That's great news. That's great news. Right behind you. Yes, you. I was going to say blue checkers, but I think you both are wearing it. So.
My name's Dave. I actually live in Newton and commute in on the bike path into Back Bay, so I come pretty long ways. And there are lots of road crossings that are pretty hairy, North Beacon being one where cars don't think they should stop in crosswalks. But, yes. And there's no pedestrian signals. But I think this is a great solution to one of the problem areas on that commute. I also should say that I'm obviously also a driver, and I also run on the path quite regularly. So I'm again, multimodal, not quite as multi as these other guys, but pretty close. The one point I want to make about looking at River Street, and I hate to bring that up again, but I do know that there is a project in process for DOT on the Mass Pike straightening out the whole curve around the Austin Brighton toll that involves a redo of the whole surface infrastructure around there. And it seems to me that there must be in that some way to mitigate or minimize the car-bike interactions that the current disaster on River Street, where there is no pedestrian signal and you're basically, again, as someone said, taking your life in your hands pretty much every time you cross. Because you're crossing where cars are trying to go.
That's a great comment to make to the Alston team. I'm aware of the Alston project. I have had the... clearly I'm a MassDOT employee, and I think that that's a message to send to them, and continue to have that dialogue with the I-90 team, some of whom are at this table.
Writing it down.
Thank you. And I don't mean to defer, but frankly, it's well outside my project area, and we hear that quite a bit. So, thanks for your input. I'm going to go to the back of the room, Steve, and then we'll come back up front.
Steve Miller, also from Livable Streets Alliance on the board. And it's a real pleasure to congratulate you guys. It's been a long time coming. I feel that you guys have really done an amazing job of coming through and figuring out a way to make it work that mode continues. I think it's important to think through. We were talking earlier about risks, and that has gone down in the conversation. But I think it's really important for the engineers at MassDOT, who, as was said earlier, like to live in a world of circumstances and formulas and numbers,
right,
to accept we're in a transition period. And it will take some years. Of course, with the cars, it took a long time, millions of dollars to do the research, came up with all this stuff. We're not likely to get that much money for pedestrian and bicycles. But we will be learning as we go. And I think in the meantime, it's incumbent on the engineers to facilitate that transition by listening to the community at risk you're actually going a little slow to begin with. But the chances of serious accident on this, well, not zero, is pretty low. If you think about it, it's 18 feet wide.
And at the top.
Okay, 18 feet. That's about from the wall to me. And if you can't find a way to get past somebody, you shouldn't be on the bike in turn. You probably won't get to the bike. So I think it's important for us to accept and applaud that you're looking carefully to see that we minimize the risk. And I think it's important for MassDOT, despite its history, to accept that you cannot get rid of all risk, especially in something where we don't yet know all the answers. And if the community thinks it's good, there's a decent chance it is.
Agreed. Thank you, Steve. I'm going to come back to the front.
Thank you. So my name is Harry Madison. I'm an Alston resident. And just to follow on Steve's point, I think we're talking about the wrong risk. The risk is someone either walking or trying to bike across the intersection and getting hit by a car and really injured or killed. And that's the real risk that hopefully doesn't happen, doesn't happen tonight, doesn't happen, ever. But that's the risk we should be really worried about and trying to mitigate. I mean, right, when we were here, and Nate was here, right, for last summer for a meeting talking about the Mass Pike, and she would really like to make the Mass Pike safer and would like to make Cambridge Street safer. And that night, while we were leaving the meeting, someone was trying to cross Cambridge Street to walk from the river back into Alston, and they got hit by a car and killed. So, these are the real risks that people are taking their lives into their own hands, trying to walk and bike along the Charles River and in our neighborhood. So we need to not be so worried about, well, what if someone's brake cable snaps and they bump into someone and they scrape their leg, when we have intersections that are so overloaded with cars. You have buses, you have the Harvard shuttle, which is only going to be running more and more, all kinds of other shuttle buses back and forth, and hundreds and thousands of, whether it's Harvard undergrads crossing the bridge, or when there's a charity walk or any of these other events, huge numbers of people trying to cross here, and it's just really unsafe, and that's the risk we should be really serious about mitigating.
Harry, that's the reason why we're here, and that's the risk we know. That's the risk we understand, and that's why the conversation.
And that risk is so much more serious than what we were talking about earlier, that I hope we can move beyond that. The other couple things I just wanted to mention briefly. One is, I don't know if everyone's aware of the wonderful project that DCR is doing on Greeno Boulevard, where they're converting what was sort of a highway with a little ratty, not even a sidewalk, pseudo sidewalk, into a wonderful bike trail, pedestrian trail, and path to go from the Arsenal Street Bridge up to the Elliott Bridge. And a great program that MassDOT and DCR started this year, which is the Park and Pedal program, which says, hey, instead of driving from Newton or Watertown or wherever you're coming from, drive into Alston, park your car at Herder Park, and then get on a bike, and we'll have a bike convoy into downtown Boston. And Boston does the Bike Fridays thing, which is the same idea. And these are great programs, but all these people that were saying, oh, bike into Herder Park and park by the river and then have a safe and enjoyable ride into the city, this is the sort of project that would be exactly consistent with the spirit that's behind both of those projects, trying to make a safer infrastructure, trying to let us be healthier and greener in how we travel, and encouraging people to do that, which is why I hope that DCR will take the spirit of both of those, that DCR project and that DCR MassDOT initiative, and move forward with this project as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Aaron.
So I'm David Montague, I'm the founder of Park and Pedal.
There you go.
So we love this project. It's tremendous. We're very excited about it. I'll say two things that you said that I have to just comment on it, and this gentleman hit it right on the head. So tonight at 6 o'clock, I was running a little late, and I found myself at this subject intersection. One right cycle, I counted 25 pedestrians and bicyclists trying to cross the street. And, and nobody was
I saw it too about 5:45. It was,
Yeah, it's-
nobody was smiling. I was like, I'm wincing.
This is October 22nd. After dark, there are 25 people in one light cycle. This is not the middle of the summer. So it's a busy place for cyclists and pedestrians. And so I heard a lot of talk about being conservative and cautious, but, and I also heard that doing nothing costs nothing, and I don't think either of those things are true. Or certainly doing nothing costs nothing when there are 25 people sort of running for their lives across that intersection in one light cycle on October 22nd, the moment this meeting is starting. There's a cost of doing nothing, definitely. So I encourage you to do as much as you can as quickly as you can.
Hear you. And so if I could clarify, so Dan, I think you and I talked about this. I'm not quite as familiar with the Park and Pedal program in terms of, so this was something you sponsored and worked with MassDOT. We didn't do this. This was something you did.
Well, no. So park and pedal. So I've been parking and pedaling at the Herd Lot or the Dolly Rink for many years. I've been doing, and I finally decided that why am I the only one doing this? It's just a tremendous thing. And so I run a bike company and decided that we're going to give back to the community and try and get this one. We dealt with Nicole Friedman for a number of years, trying to get her to do it with the city of Boston. And eventually we partnered with DCR. And DCR is a tremendous partner. Really embraced the program. Secretary Pollack was wonderful. Doing everything. Secretary Beaton. And they all came out July 31st. Renata was there. We had just a tremendous launch for the program. So we're very excited. Today, all but 2 spaces in the Park and Pedal Lot are full.
Congratulations. That's great news. Great news. All right. Well, thanks for your input and your comments. David.
2 things. The cars on Store Drive, they have underpasses, so we're going to compete with the car having underpasses. This helps. Second thing I want to mention is that there's a user group we haven't mentioned yet today, like all the runners to raise their hands.
Wow.
They're being a little bit quiet here, so I want to make sure that they're recognized because runners don't like to stop as much as anyone else, even more than anyone else. So I want to make sure that that the underpasses serve not only cyclists and pedestrians, but runners.
Sorry I lump you guys in with pedestrians all the time. and just as a point, if I could just interrupt you real quick, David, one of the things that we've integrated into the underpass design is leaving a little space for an engineered goat path. And it's not really engineered, it's stone dust. But this way you guys don't have to kill the grass on your own, we'll do it for you. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
My name is Art Tischler. I'm a relatively new bicycle commuter from Newton. And I've already had more than my share of interactions with cars on these bridges. So I see this very nice, really lovely proposal appearing here. And I'm just wondering whether I'm likely to live to see it. So,
how's your heart now?
Healthy heart. So realistically, what sort of time frame is there if something like this turns out to approximately like this is the final plan, which it seems like?
Well, unfortunately, I can't say. There is some uncertainty. There's several realms of uncertainty. Right now, we have approval from the administration to advance, and we have design money appropriated and allocated, with this team to get us to that point. That's what has been allocated. There's uncertainty in how arduous the historic consultation process may be, and the amount of time that may take. It's unclear to us right now what that effort entails in terms of, the consultation is at, MHC drives that bus. Like I said, they're not the final arbiter, but they do have control. And, there are typical timelines are on the order of, for an adverse effect associated with, say, when we replace a historic bridge structure. And and that bridge is on the National Register, and we go through that consultation process. And we're able to very easily document through more certain engineering terms that rehabilitation of that structure is not feasible, and so therefore replacement of it represents an unavoidable adverse effect. In this case, I think we're making the argument that we need to provide that safer connection for non-motorized users. But that's our case to make to MHC, and then go through that process. So that's the first area of uncertainty. That could be anywhere from 6 months to a year to more. And I'm not going to put a handcuff on our architectural historians that says, well, you guys told us it would take this long. We don't know. That's a best guess as of right now. It could be sooner, to be optimistic. The other is what happens after we get to that preliminary design milestone. The last thing we are scoped to do right now is get through that consultation process and have the design advance somewhere between 0 and 25, somewhere we call it maybe a 10% conceptual phase. Present that as part of this overall feasibility report, and then continue to advance into the preliminary design. Then we would conduct a design public hearing, as is one for MassDOT to do as part of our overall operating procedures. And then we wait. We would wait for direction from the administration to continue to advance the design into a state of final design. We would look to the administration to either put this in the list of non-federal aid priorities in the capital improvement program, and then have it undergo a rigorous analysis in accordance with our new project selection criteria and prioritization protocol, which hasn't actually started yet, or seek other alternative funding sources. Like I said earlier, the underpass, it represents about a $4 million capital investment. It's not hundreds of millions. It's nowhere near the investment that we're talking about in Alston. So in the scale of major highway capital improvement projects, it's not huge, but it's also $4 million to be spent on a facility that, frankly, MassDOT doesn't operate outside of the limits of that bridge. So it's above my pay grade to decide or determine how funding gets allocated. I'm doing what I've been tasked to do, which is advance the project to the state that we're told. So there is some uncertainty in terms of priority of funding and allocation at the administration level, within the overall policy framework that MassDOT has established and that the state legislature has established for MassDOT in accordance with our project selection criteria. That was something that the legislature requested MassDOT prepare and implement in our 2012 Transportation Finance Act that increased the gas tax by 3 cents, had the initial indexing that got rolled back under the voter the ballot initiative last year, so there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't determine what projects get funded. I oversee a design team that gets us to our milestones. So I can't say yes or no, unfortunately. But I see one optimistic face, or maybe a couple others. So
speaking of funding, have you thought about talking to Harvard? I think Harvard helped somewhat with the very small amount, but somewhat with the Reed's footbridge reconstruction recently. That certainly enhances their campus. This is a huge, this project as well would do that. And developing the whole Alston campus seems to me would be a perfect match for what we've been seeing is the transportation future. Rather than running shuttle buses through all our neighborhoods, they should be encouraging bicycle and other pedestrian traffic.
And that may be an opportunity, a door to knock on, but again, that's not for me to knock.
Great idea.
It's not. Dan, do you know anything about the contribution I made to the Weeks rehabilitation?
It was probably about 75% DCR and 25% Harvard.
That's a fairly, it's not a bad idea. certainly not something to be ruled out.
My name is Kelsey Carl O'Brien. I'm with the Charles River Conservancy, and I was wondering, I know you said you can't make the knock on Harvard store, but are there any suggestions for what all these excited advocates can do to help you move this project forward? It can do to help you.
Feel free to advocate to Harvard on our behalf. I think,
how much rent do they pay for the boathouses, Dan?
What's that?
That's
How
always
much rent do
it's
they
a
pay
bit
for
of
the
an awkward.
We're still reevaluating
It's a bit of
those
an awkward.
leases,
I
and it's been
don't
taking too
really know
long.
how they would feel about this.
When do
We
they
haven't
go?
talked to them about it.
The leases,
Or they're just renegotiating?
the leases aren't up anytime soon. It's really just our legal staff have been tasked with reevaluating all of those leases and trying to do fair market appraisals. And then they come out with some preliminaries, and there's been a lot of pushback.
I mean, that's an awkward question for you guys to ask me. I keep doing what you're doing. I mean, it's worked so far, right? And
There's also the burden between BU, MIT, and Northeast, the student
clearly we're
body
here,
use of those
and
paths.
you've been effective.
Intense.
Well, Alston rests, Alston can, certainly the Secretary of State is the person who controls the Historical Commission in Massachusetts. That's where that lives. So the Secretary of State in Massachusetts is an Alston resident. As far as I know, and he lives on Great Street, right? So it would be reaching someone that folks in the community would want to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to pin this on MHC. This really isn't about.
But you use MHC a lot as an excuse or the reason why you can't do this. I've heard this.
No, I never said we couldn't, did I?
I've heard it for the last 10 years. It's one of the major reasons why this is a problem. It seems like we need to at least address that, help you address that issue, get past that element. That's a problem. I can see from everyone who's talking about it.
I mean, I would say it is a procedural challenge.
There's no point in addressing MHC at this point until they actually have a project from us. Right now, they don't have a project. They've given us an opinion based on previous concept, but we haven't examined all the alternatives that they have asked us to examine, so the ball's still in our court.
And there's a public process to their review and consultation process, so that's when you would attend meetings and offer your opinion, perspective, and support for the project.
What alternatives have you not explored?
So I think that was a kind of sort of, hi Kathy. So that we haven't presented this to the boardwalk alternative most specifically. We have not presented this new updated feasibility study to MHC.
And we also told MHC that we were making at-grade improvements. And I'm concerned that we aren't letting those at-grade improvements run their course. That we are saying that we now think the at-grade improvements are not sufficient, even though we said they were sufficient. MassDOT. And there's no way for us to prove the insufficiency of those at-grade improvements until they're built. Because at this point, we have told them that they should be sufficient. So it's a little awkward to go back to them now. I'm willing to do it, but it's a little awkward to say that we have changed our mind.
Without having seen it through.
Without showing that the at-grade improvements do not work entirely.
Jeff?
I think the concept there of sufficiency is part of the problem. As some of you know, I directed the re-study for Governor Sargent of controversial expressways and transit lines back in the early 70s. And when we were looking at improvements to the MBTA, we from time to time got a pushback to say, well, if you want to do this, are you implying that what we have is not sufficient? And the response was so obvious that what we're proposing is to improve things. And I think the concept here is that your surface improvements have improved things, but this would improve them even more. And I think that's a kind of a construct that people really understand. But the idea that sufficiency is this black and white clear-cut line, I think is a problem in the way this is being thought about. And, you know, the comments in this room tonight are really expressing the fact that there are so many different types of users, from the people who drove their cars across the bridge tonight. I've been riding on my bike and walking across this bridge for over 25 years, so long before the current construction. The anger and irritation and huge risk, both on the part of the drivers and the bikers and the runners and the pedestrians and the sight impaired and the wheelchairs. I've seen all these trying to cross the Anderson Bridge. I think you have here, that you presented tonight, a project with multi-purposes that reflects an urgent need by multiple types of users. And to artificially simplify the purpose down to, well, we're not going to threaten what we stated about the sufficiency of the safety by implying we need this additional safety, to me is a less than enthusiastic way to think about this project, and a less than enthusiastic way to present it to Mass Historic for their consultative review. So I hope a message from tonight is the complexity and multiplicity of the purposes, including advancing commuting and safety, enhancing our recreational experiences, improving the environment along this beautiful river by having a beautiful pathway that we don't have to go to a surface, improving wheelchairs so they don't have to climb up to this intersection and can go along the underpass and the tunnel. So I guess I'm hoping, Mike, that message of multiplicity is really key, and that the idea of sufficiency is not going to stand in the way of this.
Once we submit the feasibility study to MHC, I think those type of comments, especially from the public, will be very helpful.
Well, I think what we need is those kinds of comments from MassDOT in the language of the feasibility study. We want to see your enthusiasm for this. I'm putting you on the spot.
Trying to be unbiased.
That's what we want. Well, I think you've heard,
No, we'd like you to be supportive.
You've heard unbiased comments here tonight by a lot of, we can call them interests, people who have real live interest in seeing this done.
I'm going to play third-party mediator, as I think you've done many times in the past, Jack. I think, you know, your perspective is insightful and clearly a little different than Jeff's. And you know, we'll digest the message that we're getting from folks tonight. Pete Sutton, our statewide bike and ped coordinator, just reminded me that this may be a good opportunity to tell the advocacy community and folks who are interested in transportation planning and capital improvements to participate in our statewide initiative to seek public input from our stakeholders and the public at large about our capital conversations program. Right now we're hosting, I think it's over a dozen meetings statewide that are an open house forum to come in, meet with subject matter experts, submit comments. I went to one at the State Transportation Building. It was a lot of folks that you would expect to see, you know, the transportation types. But there's a lot more that are happening out in the communities, and we're getting a lot of great feedback. So if you guys aren't able to, I think there's actually, so I have to thank you because you're here at my meeting on Anderson instead of over in Cambridge at that meeting. But that opportunity is multiplicitous. So you could go to a meeting and talk to MassDOT staffers. And you could talk to us, because clearly we're doing the thing that most of you, I think, are interested in. But you can also submit comments electronically. I'm sure if you just Google Capital Conversations MassDOT, you'll get right to wherever that platform is. So just want to plug that. It's a major initiative to help craft our priorities in programming the future years of our capital improvement program, and coupling that with our new project selection advisory council and project selection criteria. I think it'll be a very informed, data-driven approach to transportation planning, capital improvement planning. I'm going to go back, unless you have something about this conversation.
I could have been at the other one. I could have been at the Cambridge Transportation meeting, and I chose to be here. And I chose to be here because I think at-grade work is minimal acceptable standard. We're not about minimal acceptable standard here. There is an opportunity to enhance and improve and create a quality of life differential here that has, magnitudes of so many. And so I just want you to know that as somebody who was torn between which meeting to come to, I think this one is very.
Well, thank you for joining us, sharing your insight. I'm going to go to the back of the room, and then I'll come back over here so you guys can put your hands down.
My name is Brendan Marty from Boston. I actually had a comment on the at-grade. The at-grade is super important for the cross-river crossing. So this is, it's not all about the along the river, which this is wonderful about. The underpass is great. But it really is about choice, and people aren't going from point A to point B. They're doing trips all over the place. Today, I came from Central Square. The bus was not going to be for another 25 minutes. I ran here. It's about mode choice. Like people in the room, obviously everyone is toxic, right? In multimodal. People walk off some new drive. We don't always just walk.
But you never drive.
I have access to the car. I just wanted to thank Renata for a minute, because Renata has, Renata, your vision and perseverance here and persistence has been great, and thank you for bringing people together and pushing this forward again and again.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm going to go over here, and then we'll come back.
I have a question about the sufficiency of accommodating the traffic that is on these bike paths in terms of walking and biking. I run a store in Belmont, which is in the Trapelo Road corridor, and I'm involved a little bit about the final striping that is going on the street, and it seems very overbuilt in many areas to me. And the answer that I get from town officials in Belmont is, well, it's been designed for protections in 2025, when traffic counts are like this fantastic number, supposedly. Do they go into projects like this too? Because the 18-foot wide tunnel, that seems very adequate for what we might be expecting here. But the at-grade solution, I think, if the increase in bicycle traffic and walking and all these things is increasing anything like it's been in the last 10 years, there's no way the at-grade solution can carry this kind of traffic in 10 years, or even in 2. Because, as somebody said before, on October 27th after dark, there were 25 people trying to cross on bike and foot.
That's a great point. I think it's something that, as Steve Miller was saying, kind of making this point earlier, that we're at this pivotal moment in shifting how people folks like officials like me and others in this community of practice, engineers and planners, look at transportation improvements and how we're prioritizing, and allocating space. We're in a little bit of growing pains, like the crab molting his old shell and growing into the bigger new one or something. And I think we've always had really strong methods, tried and true methods that are nationally syndicated, that that we can point to, you know, or you can lean on a regional planning council to give you growth rates. We have seen a phenomenal increase in mode share and in non-motorized choices. And I think trying to estimate that is difficult, but qualitatively, we know it's going to increase. And I think that's a really great point to make about providing some additional capacity. And that was why one of the, the goals and outcomes of that we presented tonight was improving the efficiency there. We weren't expressively saying because we expect, continue to expect, 500 more by 2040 or something. There's not really any way to be that quantitative, but it's in our minds, and I think it's definitely something we need to consider. And maybe, who knows, maybe 5-10 years from now we'll have better predictive methodologies for understanding how to account for increases in bicycle and pedestrian travels. It's something I've been advocating on a national level to do research on this in this area, because we don't really know. What happens when, we always say, this is something I've been harping on for a couple of years now, and some of my colleagues nationally are just tired of it. They're like, oh, we know what you're going to talk about, mode shift again. But we always have this anecdotal, qualitative remark about, oh, well, if we build it, they'll come. And in Boston and Cambridge, and now, of course, Somerville, that is an absolute reality. And in the suburbs and the exurbs in rural areas, that's not a commonly held belief necessarily. It's you're wasting space, you're wasting money, you don't need to build that, yada yada. But then you look at places like Boston and Cambridge, where we do have a significant amount of non-vehicular mode share. There's no way for us to figure out. We can't quantify how many more cyclists or pedestrians or runners or recreational users, how much, what is the value of that in terms of numbers? We don't have a good way of predicting that, and it's something that I think nationally as a whole in our practice, it's a void, and something that we need to do to justify cost effectiveness. We need to do to justify program eligibility in terms of different pools of federal funding. And it's a great point. And I think as we do make more investments in bicycle and pedestrian runner only type capital improvements, we can start drawing some of that data, because we have counts now. We expect that users will continue to rise. Peter, feel free, jump in. I'm talking about research and academics. You're the right guy.
Projecting to the future is always uncertainty. But if we go back to the past, counts were done for this project. In 2009, there were 52 path users in the peak hour, PM peak hour. The same PM peak hour in 2015, 123 in the summer and 140 something in September. So the growth
in just 5 years.
Yeah. So that 6 years. So that growth is strong.
Yeah. So we do actually have data. So we're maybe this project, when if and when we got there and it was constructed, this would be one of those national examples, perhaps. Okay, it's 8 p.m. 8:05. Oh, and I promised to get to you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Paul.
I don't have much else to add other than to say thank you. This is amazing. 18 feet is more than I ever thought you could get here, so it's going to be fantastic. And in terms of the surface improvements, the city, I'm with the city of Boston. We've made comments over the years on surface improvements. One thing that might be able to do inexpensively is to revisit the signal timing. And Peter Firth has made a lot of comments in the city about shorter signal cycles and how that improves dealing with the cost that they have. So I would just encourage you to take a look at that as part of the ongoing project, as
Sure.
well as any of the other improvements that you're doing.
It's a great suggestion, especially since it's been several years since we planned and engineered that timing and phasing plan. So
Thank you. Congratulations.
thank you. All right, I'll take one more, and then I think we'll close.
Hi, my name is Theo Connor. I'm a runner, a cyclist, a civil engineer, and a student right now. And I apologize, I missed the presentation earlier, but as a project with the state that went through several rounds of design, and it could never be built because of the funding. They would never be able to get it. So could you talk a little bit about how much the potential costs? I mean, I know that you're working on design, you're not working on, getting the funding. That's a separate piece that's perhaps out of your control. But how does that, the budget that you're working on, how does that feed into the design? Of what, 18 feet looks great. I wonder if it's a little aggressive and maybe too costly.
Ultimately, I don't think the width of the tunnel really drives the cost too much.
Right.
I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I think building a smaller tunnel would be an incremental reduction in cost, I think. Just getting out there and blasting through the tunnel there's kind of a set cost to do that work, and to make it a little smaller, I don't think it would make that much difference.
And I apologize, this is just something I can see right here, but were there other parts of the design that, were impacted by what you thought might be feasible in terms of budget down the road? Something that impacts.
Well, I think this site, as Michael mentioned, is kind of, you call it the low-hanging fruit of all the various potential underpasses, because there's the land leading up to it. The approaches are fairly easy to do, and I think this is a fairly inexpensive underpass project as a result.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Have a good night, and thanks for skipping out.